Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this first book presentation organized by the Faculty of Letters and Human Sciences in Rabat and the Revue Langues et Littérature. We're honored and delighted today to receive a renowned scholar, Mohammed Errihani from Purdue University, Northwest in northern Indiana. That's Hammond, northern Indiana. And Mohammed has kindly accepted to come over today and talk to us about his latest publication, a book with Springer Nature entitled Language, Power, and the Economics of Education in Morocco. I've had the privilege to read the book, and I probably will give him the floor first to talk about it, and then I would also like to thank Professor Mina Afqir from University Hassan II, Casablanca, Ain Shuk, from the English department, and she has kindly accepted to serve as a first discussant. I understand that this time of year it's not very easy with all the grading, exam tasks. You know, it's the end of the semester. It's kind of a hectic period, but she kindly accepted to be with us. We have 3 journals actually published by this institution. One of them is Langues et Littérature. The other one is مجلة كلية الآداب and the Esperista Muda. Okay. So the journal has had a number of ups and downs. Fortunately, we managed to get it started again. So I'll start with a short overview of the journal itself before we start the book presentation itself. So the journal started in 1981. What you see there is the first volume. It has a different color. And then that's the first volume, 1981. And from 1982 to 2004, we had that other color, which is yellowish, okay? And then we switched to another cover. That's the third one from my left. And that's pretty much the cover for the volumes from 2009 to 2012. And then we moved on to the online publishing experience, and we managed to publish a couple of volumes. Unfortunately, we don't have a paper version. Now, that is supposed to be the latest version, but we don't have a paper version yet. Probably it's coming up. And then the journal had these ups and downs, as I said, but we managed to restart it again, and then one of the good things is that the entire volume, all the journal, all the volumes are available online now for consultation and downloading. Okay, so I would suggest that you guys go and check that, and I would also like invite people who are interested to send us their publications. We do serious reviewing. We do reject some papers, but you're welcome to participate. Now, some of the professors that we've had, so from 1981-1990, the journal was edited by Professor Jilali Saib, and then from 1991 to 1995, these dates are approximate because I don't have really like the exact dates. I had to work them out from all sorts of sources. Then we had Professor Ahmed Boukous, who is currently the rector of IRCAM, and he was the chief editor from 1991 to 1995, then Professor Brahim Moussabir from 1995 to 1997, and then Professor Boujma Al-Khadr from 1997 to 2004, and Professor Said Grawit from 2009 to 2022, and I took over Said Grawit, who is one of my colleagues. So Professor Jilali Saib from the English department, Professor Boukous from the French department, Professor Moussabir from the English department, Professor Al-Khadr from the French department, and Said Grawit from the English department. There was this kind of rotation, and the reason is that the journal is actually publishing in foreign languages because we have the other journal, which is مجلة كلية الآداب, that specializes in publishing in Arabic. And this is the link to the journal, and that QR code will take you directly to the archive. So you're welcome to check out the the journal. So before moving on, this event would not have been possible without the insistence of the dean and her help with all the logistics and everything else. There are a number of people who helped us from the administration. So our dean, Dr. Leila Munir, apologizes for not being able to be here. She's away. But we also had significant administrative support from our Dr. Ghoulami Khadija, and from Mr. Nasser Jadoun, our Secretary General, Ms. Dunia from the deanship, Mr. Bubkar, the accountant. We also have people around us helping us here, okay, and Sim Hussein, who was here earlier. Two students helped a lot. Some of them are, okay, so Yassine is there taking pictures, and Sim Mohammed is somewhere else here. Thank you very much for your collaboration. And I'd like to thank our guests. So we have colleagues, Sim Mohammed Hibi. It's an honor to see you again. Sim Mohammed Hibi was our professor. Later, I had the honor of becoming his colleague. So thank you so much for being with us. It's always a pleasure. We have colleagues from the English department. Unfortunately, they're sitting all back there. There's a number of them. You can see them in the back, two back rows in there, except for Ayoub, who is coming from Casablanca, together with Si Abdelaziz Boudlel from the Department of English in Msik, Sir Dedragik from the Department of English in Jdida, Si Ahmed Sharfi from the Department of English and Other Language at Faculté de Sciences d'Éducation. I have Si Hamouri, okay, Zaid, Si Mohammed Smirkou, and here we have colleagues from the IRCAM, Si Abdullah Rashid, former director of the center, I don't remember the center. Nourad Zarq, both of them are researchers in the Centre d'Aménagement Linguistique de l'IRCAM, Si Mustafa Al-Qadiri from the History Department, Lalla Fatima Zahra from the French Department, Si Yusuf Bahmed from NS. Okay, I'm sorry I can't go around, but I'm thanking everybody, and I would like to thank all the students who are also here with us. Okay, so you're really welcome, and it's an honor to receive you here. Now I'll give the floor to Si Mohammed Errihani to present the book, and then Si Mohammed insisted on not taking too much time and actually devoting some of the time he would have used for the presentation for you guys to talk to him about his book later. So the way we're going to proceed is I'll give the floor to Si Mohammed first, then I'll give the floor to Professor Mina Afkir to discuss with him the content of his book, and then I'll probably ask him a few questions about the process of publishing and publishing with Springer. And I think I'm running out of things to say, so Si Mohammed, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
This is pressure, okay? And it's nerve-wracking to see some big names in this room. I'd like to thank you for coming to this presentation. I'd like to thank Si Karim and Ms. Amina Afkir for taking the time to read my book, and Si Karim for inviting me to give this presentation about the book. When I wrote the book, or what I submitted my proposal, and so this is a bit of a challenge for me to be able to talk to some of you who actually know a lot about the topic of the book, and also in certain instances may know more than I do. But again, my audience was not a Moroccan audience in mind, but I will try to focus on a few things that I write in the book, and then I will invite comments based on what you know through your experiences with the Moroccan educational system and the role that language plays in the educational system, and whatever crisis it's undergoing these days. So as I state in the preface of the book came to fill a void by investigating the educational crisis and the underperformance of the system as a whole, as well as to identify some of the underlying factors that have led to this crisis, and finally suggest some possible solutions to this situation. The main thrust of the book is to argue that language indeed plays a leading role, if not the driving force, behind this crisis. I'm not sure to what extent I have succeeded in articulating the correlation between the underperformance of the educational system and the language factor, but that is something for the readers to determine and to judge, and for the experts to judge. But I'm convinced I have at least tried. I also believe that this work is a timely contribution to the field in the way it's relevant to the discussion of the condition of the educational system in the country as it continues to unfold on an almost daily basis. It is ultimately hoped that this work and others that deal with similar topics succeed in compelling and motivating the decision makers and the institutions in charge of enacting language policies to act in good faith and bring about genuine change that would make the educational sector a more inclusive and equitable for all. I would like to limit my talk today to one area of the book, the one that focuses on the economics of education, and in particular the economics of language, which is manifested in two types. First, the economics of language as an investment in human capital, which yields returns and economic growth on the individual as well as the state. And second, the connection between the economics of language and the privatization of the educational system. Now, first of all, the book essentially deals with the impact of language on economic outcomes. In other words, it deals with how the power of language can be instrumental in shaping and determining economic outcomes, and how certain language skills can yield economic advantages and benefits to the individual as well as to the investing entity, that is the country or the state. Now, viewing education in economic terms means that investing in the educational sector is a no-brainer. In other words, education is an investment in human capital, which yields returns in terms of pay, productivity, and economic growth, not only for the individual, as I said earlier, but also for the state, that the investing entity. Thus, education and language in particular becomes a human capital and a marketable asset. Now, investing in education is more than just a social or economic issue. It is also rather political, because it is about creating access to this precious knowledge that in many cases can be limited to the few who can afford it and benefit from it. One can therefore argue that the political system holds the prime responsibility for the ills and the underperformance of the educational system as a whole, as Alawi and Springboard argue convincingly in their 2021 book called The Political Economy of Education in the Arab World, for failing to provide an equal playing field for all members of society. Now, typically, investment in human capital for the purpose of economic development in Morocco tends to be explained and supported in terms of numbers, and namely in terms of the expansion of infrastructure and the increase in the number of students attending schools. In other words, the outcome of investment is usually justified by the number of students and buildings built to house them, although little is invested in the educational content or pedagogical approaches, teachers in recruitment, training. For instance, despite the rhetoric that accompanies every educational reform for the need to be open to acquiring foreign languages in Morocco, little concrete investment is made in foreign language teaching and learning with the goal to benefit those who need it most, that is, public school students, who have undergone the damaging effects of Arabizations, as many of you know. Therefore, investing in human capital means more than just providing a classroom space for all. It also means guaranteeing equity, social justice, and free access to resources, and especially linguistic resources. Now, any language policy choice, including in language education, will tend to make some groups better than others. In the case of Morocco, promoting and allocating resources to a specific language, in this case Arabic, is explicitly stated in all official documents and discourses. However, when it comes to investment in foreign languages, to say that the state's discourse is often ambiguous and subtle seems to be an understatement. For the foreign language assumed to be worthy of investment for its high economic returns is never explicitly stated or mentioned in any official capacity, although everyone knows which language we're talking about. Everyone is fully aware that the favored foreign language in Morocco is French, a language that is expected to continue to exercise its ascendancy on the linguistic scene in Morocco for a long time, thanks to the powerful French-speaking elite and who are intent on maintaining their economic and cultural capital through what Myers-Scotton in 1993 refers to as elite closure. The impact of language on economic outcomes is a salient phenomenon in the Moroccan context, where French continues to be directly linked to economic advantages and benefits. But as we all know, proficiency in French goes beyond linguistic competency alone and involves sociocultural determinants such as class and economic capital, or what Pierre Bourdieu terms linguistic habitus. This habitus entails both linguistic proficiency as well as the ability to maneuver and operate in different sociocultural contexts where French is the desirable mode of expression. Hence, the definition of linguistic proficiency in this context goes beyond simple effective communication using a certain linguistic medium and includes linguistic capital that confers more socioeconomic and cultural value on the speaker within that linguistic market and extends to the job market as well. Proficiency in the dominant language entails not only socioeconomic capital but also productivity in the labor market, in the sense that a person who is proficient in the target language is also expected to be productive in an economic sense. A topic that I wrote about in more detail in an article titled Language and Social Class Speaking Derija with the Right Accent. I think it was published in the Journal of North African Studies in 2015 or 15 probably. Language, therefore, plays a major role in national and economic development, especially in a state characterized by multiple language varieties and indirect competition. Now, such linguistic diversity might be considered a blessing in a multilinguistic and multicultural setting, such as Morocco, as it entails a sense of cultural diversity, inclusivity, and belonging. However, in economic terms, multilingualism could also be a potential challenge to economic development due to a lack of economic efficiency and the negative impact that such a situation might have on policies that will typically favor one language and one group at the expense of another. In other words, multilingual polities with more than one recognized official language often find it challenging to strike a balance between a minority and a majority language. And the result is that the de jure and the de facto linguistic policies become the order of the day in such situations, where the impact on language, on social, political, and economic outcomes necessitate that the state choose a language that is economically salient. And when that particular language is not an official language and may never be acknowledged in any official document or capacity, that is the case of French in this country. Now, this makes one wonder, is economic efficiency the poison of linguistic diversity? Scholars such as Ginsberg and Weber in 2011 certainly think so and pose the following question. How many languages do we really need to be efficient? They go on to argue that inefficiencies can result from the usage of too many languages, a view that is not always celebrated by proponents of linguistic diversity. And before reacting to such an idea, I invite you to consider the most efficient economies in the world and whether they're multilingual or not. Think about it. The clash between efficiency and emotional attachment is also unavoidable in multilingual societies, where various ethnic and linguistic groups live side by side, and where it is challenging to find a balance between efficiency and emotion, especially when the emotional attachment is to a language that has little utility in the job market. It seems that the concept of cost and benefit appears to favor a language of power and economic opportunities, even if that language continues to alienate and disenfranchise a large portion of the population. One is therefore bound to ask, what happens to social justice when access to the language of power and economic opportunities is not available to the populace, but only to the few who already possess the socioeconomic capital to afford such access? A decent education, which is often made possible by the medium of instruction, perceived to yield the most returns, has become cost prohibitive for many in Morocco. And as such, I would argue that language bears the brunt of the blame for the educational crisis that this country is experiencing, which leads me to the second point I want to raise in this short talk, and that is the privatization of the educational sector and its contribution to the current educational crisis. In the epilogue to the chapter 3 in my book, I have this statement. According to Educational International, education is a human right and a public good that can be fully realized only through the provision of free, equitable, inclusive, quality public education. The growing commercialization and privatization in and of the sector is the greatest threat to the universal right to education. Therefore, one of the direct outcomes of liberalizing the economy and encouraging investment in the private sector in Morocco has become the proliferation of the private school at all levels of the educational system. Driven primarily by economic motivations, we notice a large number of government employees now joining the private school at the expense of their primary duties, and as a result, public education in the form of students who can't afford private school is immediately impacted. We all know the results. Those of a certain age in this room probably remember the role of the private school in the good old days. It was the school of remediation and the last resort. For those people who could not really hack it in the public school. The explosion of the private school and the abandonment of the public school can be blamed squarely on the policy of Arabization, in my view. The effect of this policy was immediately felt by students and parents in terms of the underperformance and low standards, and more importantly, the inability of these students to compete with their counterparts whose parents could afford the private school or the French medium education. It is therefore ironic that a language policy in education driven by political interest has succeeded in dismantling the educational system as a whole, and the results of this policy continue to be felt to this day and will probably continue for a long time to come. Now, another offspring of private education is what we usually term the shadow education system, which is characterized by private tutoring, which also has a negative impact on the system as a whole. Reliable data on the percentage of students who receive this type of tutoring and the effect of this phenomenon on student performance is very difficult to come by, as it's an unregulated sector that does not undergo any form of government oversight. Regardless, its impact on guaranteeing a school of equity and justice is indisputable, especially for those who are unable to afford it. I'm certain each one of us is aware of several instances of this unethical practice that continues to burden parents financially and takes away from the students after school time that should be spent developing social bonds, connections, practicing arts, sports, or just enjoying a normal childhood. In my view, the call for a new Moroccan school of equity and justice for all students as promoted by the Strategic Vision of Education 2015-2030 might remain nothing but ink on paper if the government does not take the necessary steps to regulate the private sector. In other words, there would be no school of equity, equality, and development if the government is unable to seriously pledge its support for the public school through investment in human capital to meet its national development goals. I would like to close or to end by emphasizing some of the major conclusions and recommendations that the book ends with, and which I believe are essential to beginning to address the major problems that the educational system and the language problem in particular continues to struggle with. First suggestion / recommendation would be ensuring continuity and stability of the system, which means successive governments should not be allowed to discontinue any educational reforms or projects launched by their predecessors. Instead, every new government that gets elected should be required to continue the educational programs and projects introduced by the previous government. And to ensure this is the case, education officials and leaders should be retained and not leave with the departing government. To this end, education officials and policymakers should preferably be apolitical so that their main focus would be on improving and promoting education instead of serving the short-term goals, interests, and personal agendas of their parties or political leaders. 2, the status of the mother tongues must change. Literacy skills can only be developed when there is no interruption between the language of the home and that of the school. Therefore, pupils should be welcomed in their to school in their mother tongues during the first years in order to develop strong literacy skills from an early age instead of struggling to develop these skills in a language or languages that might just as well be foreign to them. 3, rethinking the status of the preschool system through investment in preschool education, which should start through the hiring of qualified instructors and providing them with the necessary support and training. And one way to guarantee the success of preschool education is to include it as part of primary education and promote the status of preschool teachers to government teachers with the same requirements and benefits as elementary school teachers. This would ensure that preschools and elementary schools have qualified teachers who do not just join the profession as a last resort or because they have no other option available to them. Next, promoting and investing in the public school while gradually divesting from the private school. Did I say public school or private school? Again, promoting and investing in the public school while gradually divesting from the private school model to ensure equity and justice for all students regardless of their income or social class. This proposition may sound controversial, but the reality is that the private school in Morocco is a for-profit business model. One could argue that they're providing a necessary service and do contribute to the educational sector in the country. But I would argue that this is the case for those who are able to afford these schools mainly, which widens the educational gap, or I would call it more than a gap, but it's, I can't find the exact word. Something that, it's a huge gap between those who haves or the haves and the have-nots. For me, this is again a question of equity and accessibility. And then there is the top-down decisions that just need to be done away with. All stakeholders ought to be included in the decision-making process when it comes to language choices, not just the policymakers. No language policy will succeed as long as the grassroots, those who are on the receiving end of the policy, are not involved in the decision-making process. Therefore, top-down decisions need to go. Teacher recruitment and selection. Now, the idea is to select top-performing high school graduates to enter teacher preparation centers or teaching majors at universities. This would ensure that the best graduates are being prepared to go out on the field and teach our children, not just those who choose the teaching profession as a last resort. Provide economic incentives and continuous professional development to guarantee their persistence and success. Next is the high-stakes exams, such as the baccalaureate exam, must be abolished and replaced by continuous assessment tools that are not based on rote learning or memorizing. In so doing, the focus should shift to the teaching principles of civic engagement, democracy, and critical thinking skills. Next is building a school of equality, equity, and inclusion for everyone. And the only way to achieve this type of school is to provide equal funding and resources to all schools, regardless of whether students are able to pay for an education or not. This means that a good education is a public good and a human right that ought to be free and accessible to all. Next, connecting the material taught in the school to the job market demands. Low return on education is a phenomenon that continues to plague students in Morocco and the MENA region in general. We should not forget that the so-called Arab Spring of 2011 was not the direct outcome of lack of employment, was the direct outcome of lack of employment, not lack of education. Education in the MENA region produces students with diplomas only, not students who can break into the workforce. Therefore, schools need to deliver knowledge as well as skills required by the job market. Linguistic choices, especially in terms of which foreign languages to include in the curriculum or the educational system, and they should be based on pragmatic considerations, not emotional or political ones. And the languages that are essential globally are the ones that need to be taught in schools, starting with the foreign language that has the most global reach and influence. And finally, educational reform requires reforming other institutions as well, not just the education. In order to reform the educational sector, other institutions must be reformed first. Educational reforms may be easier to craft, but their application and implementation will typically not materialize or succeed unless other institutions, especially state institutions that are linked to the educational system or sector, are also reformed. To reform an educational system requires good faith and the commitment of the government as well as other stakeholders to work together for the public good and for the advancement of the future of this country, which in the case of Morocco relies heavily on its young and vibrant human capital. I would like to close by acknowledging that the contributions that this book makes barely scratch the surface of the ills of the educational system and the factors that have led to its underperformance and the role that the language factor plays. But I do hope that others are able to build on the ideas presented in this work and continue the positive work for the good of this nation and its future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sidi Mohammed, for your very interesting presentation of your book. We've had a first-hand account of the book. It's very rare when we get that. And then I will give the floor to Dr. Mina Fakir to give us her evaluation of the book and her reading, and then probably some discussion. Okay, the floor is yours, Mina. Thank you.
Okay, so good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be part of this event. As Dr. Errihani said at the beginning, there is pressure. The pressure of being with my previous professors. I am also very happy to be with my colleagues from different Moroccan universities and also to be here with my students for this exchange. I would like to thank Professor Errihani for being with us, and I would like also to thank Professor Ben Soukas for having organized this event. So maybe the way I will approach the task is going to be a little bit different. I will just talk about it as a reader, that is, as someone who is a little bit detached from the book. We had a very rich introduction given by, and analysis also provided by Professor Errihani, and he basically focused on the economics of education, of course, as related to languages. He talked about the marketization of education, the disintegration of the public education in Morocco. He talked about having access or not having access to linguistic skills that would open doors to those who know them. He talked about, in his presentation, about social injustice depending on how capital, using the term of Bourdieu, is distributed among sectors within the same society. And he ended up with giving us the way he perceives change and providing us with suggestions. I would rather talk about three basic or four basic aspects that I have seen important as a reader. The first one is the relevance of the book. The second one is the documentation of the book, and the third one is the critique that we have in the book. I wouldn't go back to some of the details that have been provided by Professor Errihani. I'll try not to repeat things that have already been done. But the very first thing I would like to start with is where the book fits. Okay? As the title shows, Language, Power, and the Economics of Education, it falls within the field of educational linguistics for sure. But I would like to add that educational linguistics and sociolinguistics are very tied and are intertwined. And I'm very sure that the book is rich in, not in information, but analysis of sociocultural aspects of Moroccan society. So this is, again, a valuable contribution. Those who are interested in the social and cultural, socio-political aspect of languages. In the book, the author talked about the linguistic market, talked about the value and prestige of languages, talked about attitudes, talked about domains of use, talked about power dynamics, and all those aspects fit within the field of socio-linguistics. And I have said readers from both educational linguistics and sociolinguistics, or even linguistic anthropology, because there is always a focus on things that are cultural, that are specific to Moroccan society, will find themselves in the book. So this is concerning where the book fits. I read it as a sociolinguist, and I found myself in the book because of the richness of the notions that are handled, examined, and analyzed in the book. Professor Errihani tried to talk about the theme in general, focusing in the aspect that stands out in the book, which is the economics of education. But let me tell you that the book consists of some 7 chapters, and they are all interesting chapters in relation to language policy. Chapter 2, it is the Arabization policy and its effect on education. Chapter 3, it's the economics of language in education. Chapter 4, it's education and language reforms. Chapter 5, social justice and the language factor. Chapter 6, the mother tongue debate. And Chapter 7, language as a democratizing force. And the last chapter is language attitudes. What I have liked in the book is this triangular relation between language, education, and power. And throughout the book, I have read the titles of the chapters because I know that some of you haven't had access to the book yet. I gave them on purpose so that you have an idea about what is included in the book. And the author has never lost sight of this very complicated relationship between this very complex, intricate relationship that we have between language, education, and power in multilingual societies like Morocco. This is why I wouldn't call it only the structure of the book, I would call it the architecture of the book. That is, as the writer was reading, and I'm very sure, I have no idea about how much time he spent doing it, but I'm very sure this triangular relatedness between the 3 elements has always been there. And when the concepts, when the aspects that are studied are always in the mind of the reader, this would always give a very coherent piece of work. Probably I have a comment concerning chapter 8 where I have where the focus is on attitudes towards the Berber language, and this is where probably we will need Professor Errihani to comment a little bit on it, because as a sociolinguist, as someone in the field, I have always found language attitudes a field that is very intriguing. Students sometimes when they pick that topic think that it's easy. They will use a questionnaire and they will get information, and then they will have percentages and they will analyze them. But it's not that easy. Professor Errihani was very aware of this because in his chapter he said that he tried to work with the ethnographic approach, which is based on the observation of the community. He also worked on what is published, what is on social media, and then he added the questionnaire. But still, whenever I come across a percentage in an attitude language study, I find it very hard to interpret it, because a high percentage is not a high percentage sometimes, and a low percentage is not a lower percentage. Sometimes, as in the book, the percentage of those who said to the question, every student should be required to learn Berber starting from elementary school, and the percentage Professor Errihani got was 95%. That is, those who do not want to have Amazigh as something required in elementary school. But I'm very sure if the question was also about dialectal Arabic, which is their native language, I'm talking now about those whose native language in Arabic, I'm very sure they would also say we shouldn't have it, because now, as Professor Errihani has said, there is that economics of education that has come to the fore. People are not only relating languages to identity, not only languages as a career of an oral written heritage. No, people, especially that in his study, he worked on university students in public and private universities, and we as Moroccans, we are torn between what is emotional and there is always the return back in our minds. What are the returns of a language? So this is why I myself wouldn't consider a high percentage as a negative attitude, because sometimes it's not always a negative attitude. It is this web of interrelationships that we have among languages in a specific linguistic market. And you still remember when those two words were included in textbooks, al-Baghrir and Brewat, we had really a very strong reaction on the part of people saying a textbook shouldn't have a word from dialectal Arabic. Although this is a reality for us as Moroccans, whether we have Moroccan Arabic as an L1 or whether it is learned by those who have Amazigh as an L2. So for me, this is a chapter where I really would like to engage. Probably Professor Errihani, as a specialist in the field, would also comment on this. We measure language attitudes, but when we have the percentages, sometimes, why? Because everything is there. A lot of social variables. The mother tongue, is it the mother tongue, an L1, or is it an L2? When you give your opinion about a language, you speak very well, but it's not your L1. Like Amazigh people, including me, Berber is not my, Arabic is my L1 because I have a mother who didn't teach me the language because she didn't know the language. But we have cases in which we have friends, family members who speak Darija as if it was their L1. So there is that web of interrelationships when we talk about language attitudes, and we shouldn't take them only in a very superficial way. The age variable is very important. When you are young, you want to know languages, even at the expense of your L1. But when you grow up, so the languages would not have the same instrumentality, and probably your languages will be moderate. For the relevance of the book, before I go to it as a source of documentation, the book is very pertinent and very relevant. First, from a national perspective, it handles a theme that has its roots in the past, but it is very pertinent in contemporary Morocco. This language policy, language in education policy, it's something that has come to the fore, especially that internationally. And this is why the book is also very relevant from an international perspective, because this linguistic diversity, multilingualism, linguistic rights, all these aspects have come to the fore in the world. And this is why if we go over the world, there are many places where we have changes in language policies and education. As Professor Errihani said in his book, this is the area where we really see the implementation and the outcomes of a language policy in a country, and Morocco is no exception. It is part of these changes that are affecting the world, and probably the revision, or even surely the provision of the constitution, where Amazigh became an official language, coincided with the Arab Spring. So there is that change in the world that has pushed states and countries to revise their language policies. So this is why, for me, this is pertinent from a national perspective, because now, after the recognition of Amazigh in 2001, after its officialization in 2011, after its inclusion in the educational system in 2003. Now we live in the outcomes of that language policy. Professor Errihani did research in 2008 about that topic of attitudes, but I'm very sure from 2008 to 2023, many things have changed, even in Moroccan psyche, even in our way of perceiving languages. I'm not saying that all people now have access to the same languages and that there is no social injustice, no marketization of education. No, we still have this, but at least at the level of the community, there is something positive going on. This Amazigh now has started to take place in our psyche as Moroccans, especially when we are speakers of Moroccan Arabic as an L1. Documentation. I am very happy with the book, because what happens, and this is why I read the titles of the chapters, sometimes information is scattered about not only the language in education policy or language policies in general, any aspect. Moroccans do not have the same facilities of publication, and we will be happy to hear Professor Ben Soukas explain it to us, the process and all this. Most of the time there is that invisibility of Moroccan researchers. A lot of research is done, but little from it is visible. Abroad, it's the opposite. Sometimes little research is done and a lot of visibility, simply because we do not have the same structure in academia as we have in Europe and in the United States. So for me, this is a good documentation of the Moroccan context. For us as Moroccans interested in languages, and also for those who are reading about Moroccans and who are not Moroccans. And this is essential, because sometimes when we read publications, we come across a lot of overgeneralizations sometimes. When there isn't a mythical, this is why my second point in the presentation is documentation. When there is a book you could go to, and it's a book based on research and done by someone from academia, at least you feel a little bit secure. Of course, we check references, we read, but still, when everything is gathered, you start with it. And you see that the Moroccan context is there, and sometimes that risk of overgeneralization is not there. For example, if I go back to Boutieri, I hope I'm reading the word in the right way. Boutieri 2016 talked about learning in Morocco, and she or he, Professor? She. And she said, Moroccan public schools also face a number of structural impediments: overcrowded classrooms, inadequate facilities, an outdated curriculum and method of instruction. Yes, I share many of the ideas here. Structural overcrowded classrooms, but this is an overgeneralization. Is it by region? Is it the countryside? Is it the urban side? Do we keep the same number since independence, or have we made progress? But to give it as just like this. Also, the one that has attracted my attention is an outdated curriculum. So for me, this is also an overgeneralization. Yes, we need to work on our curricula in our primary schools and high schools, but a lot of work has been done to change curriculum. So if we want to know whether there is a change, instead of overgeneralizing, we have to go to the textbooks and compare those that were used in the 1990s with those that were used in the 20s, and so on, to be sure that the curricula have stayed as they are outdated. Just recently, there was an inclusion, for example, of story reading in Al-Qira'a of first grade children. Why? Because before we expose them to a letter like ch or sh or whatever, there is a story, and from the story there is a context, and so they would extract the basic sentence and then the basic sound, and for me this is work. So overgeneralizations always would dwarf work that has been. The same for method of instruction. We haven't stagnated since independence. There have been also changes. There was a time when everyone in Morocco was talking about situational learning. That is, if you want to ask children in primary school, you have to situate give them a context so that they would make sense of what they are writing or reading. And this is why, for me, this is a source of the documentation by a Moroccan researcher, but a Moroccan researcher who published also in the United States. Second thing I liked about the book as a source of documentation is that there is a historical examination and a contemporary analysis. And this is why in the chapter we started with the Arabization policy. The author managed to take us as readers from the Arabization policy which took place after independence till the education reforms that Morocco has been witnesses. And I found this a very nice journey through history. Even in the chapter on the Arabization policy, he gave us a very nice flashback when he talked about the Tahir al-Barbari and the effect it had, because at that time the French tried to start reforming education, what you called, Professor Errihani, les plans de réforme. So this journey, this is why I have liked this historical examination. Starting, of course, there is no chapter on what comes before Arabization, but the author did mention all those aspects that are specific to the language policy in Morocco, even before dependence. But being a historical examination doesn't mean that it is just information. No, there is a lot of analysis, or what I call document analysis. It's not only because I don't want to minimize the value of the book. It is documentation, but please, it is all the time accompanied by document analysis. And this is what would lead me to my third point in the presentation, which is the critique aspect in the book. It is relevant, it is a source of good documentation for us as Moroccans and also for non-Moroccans who work on education. But it is also a good book because there is a lot of document analysis. Professor Errihani tried to give us information about the different education reforms, but it wasn't just giving information. He tried to analyze, to see the links, to see the articles, where he tried to show that triangular relatedness. As I have said, the author has never lost track of that triangular relatedness between language, power, education, language, and power, because as we have noticed in his presentation, there was a focus on the economics of education. So whatever was analyzed when moving from one chapter to the other, it was directed through developing the main argument of the book. The other thing is that I have felt that insider perspective of Professor Errihani in his book. What do I mean by the insider perspective? I'm not talking about the ethnographic approach as an approach that is used in sociolinguistics and linguistic anthropology to collect data, because Professor Errihani paid attention to this also as a researcher, because he is from the community, he lived in the community, he tried to collect as many data as he could. No, what I mean by the insider perspective is that we feel that it is, yes, it is research, it is documentation, it is analysis, it is an argument that is being developed, but in addition to this, we feel that it is first-hand knowledge. And this makes it different from other books on the economics of education or the politics of education. That is, it is a book written by Wald Dar, although he has been in the United States for so many years, but we have this insider perspective in the book, and as a reader, I felt this throughout the book. The book is also important from those interested in the comparative paradigm within educational linguistics. We have a lot of people comparing systems, comparing the MENA region with Europe, with the United States, and this is a good book. It is from a researcher, and in addition to this, from someone who has this insider perspective, because he is very familiar with the linguistic, cultural, political context. Information is in the books about this, but when you see it from an insider perspective, it's very rewarding, especially if you do not fall in bias. That is, we have the insider perspective, but I'm very sure that the author, this has never happened to the author, because there was an objective analysis both when it was documented analysis and when it was the other data collected for attitudes that was analyzed. The last thing I hope I haven't been long. 25 minutes, this is what I have so far taken. 2 more minutes. Okay. It's just as I have said, there is documentation, there is relevance, there is critique and analysis, there is an argument that is there and that is developed coherently, and it is also a well-documented book. I have mentioned 7 chapters in addition to the introduction and conclusion, and at the end of each chapter you have a list of references, which means that those of you, whether as researchers or as doctoral students or BA students, MA students, I'm very sure you will find a lot of information in this book. It will lead you to so many references. I just have a small comment or a question to Professor Errihani. To what extent do you think there has been balance about what is empirical and theoretical in your interesting book? And what is the space Moroccan researchers have had in that book? Not Moroccan researchers in American universities or British, no, Moroccans in Moroccan universities, and thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Minaf Khair. And of course, I was going to suggest that you deal with this first before we move on to the other side of the presentation. Please feel free to react.
Just a quick response. I didn't pay her to praise me or praise my book, I swear. But I am flattered, thankful and grateful. I wasn't expecting such positive feedback, but I appreciate it. I think my book is less theoretical. I'm aware of that. I think it has something to do with the fact that I'm primarily a teacher who feels that the research and scholarship was imposed on me when I became an assistant professor at my current university. Then I realized that, oh, I have to do research, I have to publish if I want to get tenure. And so research and scholarship was something that was sort of imposed on me. And so I always functioned with this teacher mind. I'm more of a teacher than a scholar, and I'm aware of that might come across in my writing as well. I wish I could take all your positive comments and share them with one of my reviewers, and this may be a segue to what you're going to talk about. Because when I submitted my book manuscript for peer reviews, I received 3 peer reviews. So 2 were positive and 1 was very negative. And the problem is that you don't know who's doing what. And some of the reviewers could be Australian, British, American, Moroccan, you don't know. And the problem for a Moroccan who's writing in English is that if you get peer reviewed by somebody who's not from Morocco, their comments will probably reflect their background, where they come from, or what their expectations are, which might be completely different from what a Moroccan reviewer will tell you. This is what you should do, and these are the suggestions I have for you. These are the people that you should be reading. These are the references that you missed. While the American will tell, these are the references that you missed. How could you have missed this one or that one? You should read this and that. And so there's sort of a clash of the types of feedback that you receive from peer reviewers. But it's, even though you get negative feedback, you learn from it, because it opens your eyes to something that maybe you didn't really think about. It opens your eyes to some research or some scholars in certain fields that you were not really paying much attention to. And so you end up actually consulting those works, and you learn from them in the process. I will acknowledge and admit that the first draft of my book was trash. Literally trash. I was not happy with it. I was under so much pressure because I was going up for promotion and I needed to finish it as soon as possible. I did not pay much attention, and the reviews showed it. And I took the reviewers' feedback in a positive way, and I think I did a better job. But my first draft was not good. So if I had any advice to give people, the first draft, you should spend more time on your first draft than your second draft, especially because your first draft is going out to be judged by your peers. And so I was lucky, so to speak. But I think I took that feedback and used it in a positive way.
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, Mina. I just wanted to, before moving on to these questions, which are more of a practical nature, actually, I just want to raise bring to your attention, Mina and Mohammed, too, that Mohammed has very recently published an article, a book chapter, actually, on the attitudes towards Berber. It came out like 24 hours ago or something like that. So it's out now, and then you could just go and check probably if there are.
It's a book?
Yeah, it's just a chapter of a book. You can see it right there. Okay, the first one.
Yeah, it's just because there are so many studies done on language attitudes, and I have the impression the impression that those who published abroad would not rely a lot, would not include what is done by Moroccans. The same whenever we talk about even phonology, morphology, you go somewhere and some people would present themselves as doing this for the first time on Moroccan Arabic, whereas you are in Morocco and you know that there are doctoral studies, doctoral theses on that aspect. And this is why I asked Professor Errihani, to what extent have you been fair to the work done by Moroccan researchers?
I don't know to what extent I've been fair, but all I can say is that I've tried my best. Trying to capture language attitude is very, very tricky because it really depends on a host of factors and variables. It depends on the type of questions you ask, it depends on the context, it depends on the place. So, but I have tried, and I've had other people help me, my students, collect data and analyze data. And that's all I can say is just, I've tried as best as I could to capture those attitudes. And what I've tried to trace is that there seems to be a lot more positive attitudes towards the Amazigh language nowadays than before 2011.
Okay, thank you so much, Mohammed. So it's my turn. I'll try not to take too much time. So I'll skip the appreciation of the book, not totally, but I'll say that it's a book that I've read. Now, will I read it again? Yes. Will I recommend it to our students and colleagues? Yes. So as Dr. Mina Afkar said, it's a well-documented book, and the chapters are so self-contained, and then one of the things probably that the book has is that each chapter has its own list of references at the end of each chapter. So you really can be focused on that, and it's a good learning experience in the sense that whatever sources have been used in a specific chapter, you'll find at the end, and that makes it like easier for guys to navigate through the content of the book. Now, the themes are varied actually, and I think it's a good starting point for our students in the first place, but also for our researchers who probably would like to start working on language policy, language education, and overall sociolinguistics, overall sociolinguistics of Morocco in general. So yeah, I would recommend it to everyone to go back and read it, and I would go and read it myself with pleasure. So without further ado, I would like to use the time that I allocated to myself to ask you a few questions about the project itself. So the book project itself, in terms of difficulty, for example, the time it took to put the whole thing together from the initial inception of the book, the basic idea, all the way up to the book manuscript, and then how much time, what difficulty did you encounter in the research that led to the book and the writing process itself, because these are generally different things.
It's not an easy question to answer, especially when it comes to the time that it took. And this is a recurring question that everybody, like even my friends, my mother asked me, so how long have you been working on this book? And how much are you going to get? I got a little bit of money, but yeah. That's one thing about book contracts. When you sign a book contract, they either give you a lump sum or they give you royalties based on the number of books that they sell. I was not careful enough to read the contract, so I had no idea that there was the option of royalties. So I must have checked the box that said lump sum, which came to $900. That's it, $900. It took me more than $900 to write the book and to do research and travel and stuff. But I think the idea of writing a book is something that I've always wanted to do. But again, with promotion and tenure, you're forced to do it. And I think in 2008, I was lucky enough to get a Fulbright grant to teach in Jadida, Shaib Tukali University. Say Aziz. Well, you left that year. You left that year.
Yeah,
So,
no, when you, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
that was pretty
But he helped me actually settle and make the transition.
Just happy to have
Yeah.
you back.
Initially, I applied to go to Algeria, but then I was accepted, and I think they found out I was Moroccan. I was born in Morocco, and they refused me. And so it was luck. They assigned me to Jadida, which was fine. But anyways, I think when I came to Jadida, I came to teach, and I had a grant from Fulbright, so I came to teach linguistics, sociolinguistics, and whatever, but I needed to do something besides teaching, and I think the idea of the book just became obvious. I'm here, this is what I like to do, I need to be able to produce something. And I think by the end of the first semester in December 2018, I submitted the proposal to Springer. And then I had to wait, because when you submit your proposal, there's so many questions that you have to answer about the specifics of like the target audience. Is this a book that could be used as a textbook in a particular class, et cetera, et cetera. You have to provide them with annotated chapters, which I had to do. So I had to kind of come up with, I think they changed over time. The proposal didn't have the same exact chapters, but I improved on them. But you have to provide them with at least a solid paragraph summary or annotation of each section of the book, which I did. So I managed to do that while I was teaching. And so in December, I sent it out to Springer, and I had to wait. Probably took months for me to get the reviews, because they send them out. They send your proposal to 3 reviewers. And again, the reviewers will, based just on the idea, the title, the possible marketization of the book, type of themes it deals with, how you write, your style of writing, they determine if they think you're capable of writing a book or not. So they judge you based on minimal output, so to speak. And so, and I think once the reviewers sent in their reviews, they were mostly positive, so I basically started working on the manuscript. But then the publishing company wants a deadline. They want you to say, well, when can you submit the manuscript? So I gave them, I don't remember, probably 2 years. I said, well, 2 years from now. It went more than 2 years. And it was because of me, because I was also teaching, and I had a life. I have a family, so I was doing things and trying to write, trying to do a little bit of research, traveling here and there, collecting data, analyzing data. Reading took probably most of my time, and trying, especially based on the feedback that I received, I needed to read from here and there. Eventually, I submitted my completed manuscript, I think, in the fall of 2023. And that's like, once you submit that, there are proofs that you have to do. Now, one thing I will say about the book, if you have the chance to read it, there are still some typos in the book, which, I mean, it doesn't matter how many times you read. And when you write something, you can go back and reread it, especially if it's long. And you will find mistakes that you probably, like, you wrote "to has," or something like that. And you will find some, but then you'll give the copy to your friends. Like, can you read this and see if you catch anything? They will catch a few more. And then you give it to the next person, they will catch a few more. Well, I think my publisher didn't do a good job of catching everything. So there's still a few typos here and there, unfortunately. And I don't know if it has something to do with the publishing industry because they outsource their work now. Because I know that once my book was accepted for publication, the production part was outsourced to India. So I was dealing with people in India and because it's low cost. So they were doing the proofreading and the editing and communicating with me. We need this, we need that. So that's something that I learned in the process. Did I answer your question?
Well, yes, you definitely have, and I will just pick up on a few things. Like you talked about the contract itself, and it's not good money, is it?
No,
Okay,
when you write an academic book, don't expect to be paid
Yeah,
for it.
yeah.
No, you don't.
Well, I mean, like, for that sum of money, that's where I start telling people, I'll give you 3 times as much and don't ask me to do it. So, that's pretty much what you have. Now, on a positive note, though, what other gratification do you find you've had from writing this book, and especially after the publication itself?
Yeah, it's a load off. I think about it. I haven't picked up that book since it came out until just a few days before when I was invited to give this talk. Then I started looking at it. I stopped looking at it. I stopped thinking about it. I just needed some time not to think about it, really. So.
Yeah, so I think I have a number of points here which you've already touched on, so I'll probably skip these. But I would like to take you back to the book proposal itself and the reviewing. So my understanding is that your book proposal was reviewed
by three
peer
reviewers.
Okay, 3. And generally, they tend to be very tough. Okay, and I also assume that the manuscript itself was also reviewed by 3 people.
Yes. So there are 2 parts to the process. So the first thing you do is you write a proposal, and my advice, if there was any advice I could give, is before you submit a proposal, make sure you know what you're going to write about. Make sure you have a summary of each chapter that you want to include in your book. Because that's what they need. They need to know if you're actually capable of producing something of that length. And you have to have a solid argument. You have to be able to articulate the idea that you want to articulate in the book in a very, very short paragraph. Say, well, this is why my book is important. Is there anything else like it in the market? You need to be able to say, no, there isn't, and my book fills this void. So it has to be something special. It has to be, at least if it's a topic that's been discussed, you have to have the ability to articulate a fresh perspective or a fresh idea on that old and hackneyed topic, if you want. But I think you have to be prepared fully to answer any questions in the proposal fully, to show that you actually are capable of writing the book before you submit it for peer review, because they judge your ability to write on a few paragraphs. I know it's not fair, but that's just the way it is.
Very quickly, if you can, why Springer exactly?
The reason why I submitted to Springer is because they have language policy volumes, and so I knew exactly, because they ask you in the proposal, do you have any volume that you in mind that you think this book would belong to? And I said, yes, language policy. So they have this series of language policy volumes that they publish, and I felt that my book deals with the same topic, so it would fit very nicely with their language policy series.
So I promised the last question. You've already said, it's a load to have off one's back, but my question is, where to from here?
Can you?
I mean, like, you know, you've had a lot to deal with in publishing this book, and you don't want to look at it once it came out. You know, it's kind of a heavy load to have on one's back. But I'm still asking you the question: where to from? I mean, do you think you'll be willing to write another book on language policy or any other topic, of course?
I have a sabbatical starting January 1st, 2025. So I won't be teaching. I will be getting paid, but not teaching for a whole semester. I'm still trying, I talked to you about this. I'm still trying to think, what can I do during my sabbatical? In a perfect world, I would like to be in Morocco for that whole time, for a few months. But I am here for a month now trying to talk to people, trying to pick some people's brains and figure out what is it that I could do during my sabbatical. I have to be able to produce something during that time. I don't know what. I'm still in that stage where I'm still kind of trying to figure out which route to take, what to do. I don't know. I will have to publish or to try to get something published. I'm sure, but I don't know what. I just don't know. That light bulb hasn't gone off yet, so I'm still waiting for it.
We're looking forward to it. Now, Si Mohammed insisted on us not just presenting the book and calling it a day. He also said we would like to have feedback from the audience. And it's your turn now. Feel free to comment or ask questions. Unfortunately, we don't have a mic, but you know. Okay, so one question from, let's see, Yusuf Ahmed. Thank you. Okay.
Yes, I was expecting people's reactions to my reaction towards the private school to be exactly what you mentioned, so there's no surprise there. I am against the private school model simply because it creates a gap, a gulf. That's the word I was looking for earlier that I forgot. A gulf, not just a gap, but a gulf between the haves and the have-nots. And I am sure each one of you, as I said earlier, has personal stories or know of personal stories where people are struggling to put food on the table, yet they're forced to pay for their schools, for their kids' private school. That is not fair. That is just not fair. It's not just. It's not equitable. And that's what I have a problem with. Also, maybe I'm old school, but my teachers in primary school, or even my secondary school, didn't have a second job. And everybody was living fine. And I think it's this liberal, or the liberal economy that's just pushing people to buy more and more and more, and therefore you need to be able to make more and more and more. It pushes people to find a second job and a third job to be able to pay for stuff, okay? And that's something I have a problem with personally. I hope I've answered that question.
Okay, thank you, C. Mohammed. I'm not commenting on your comment, okay? There's politics, there's economics in it, so you would understand what I mean.
Just want to be able to tell my students.
Yeah, it's all right.
Should they use Berber or is it?
Oh, I have something.
Could I answer also?
Yeah.
First, the word is used in the book, and I myself used it because as a Moroccan, this is a word that doesn't exist in my repertoire. This Berber, which many people would say it has a negative connotation. I have never heard someone saying واش كتهضر بالبربرية واش راك. No, in my repertoire as speaker of Darija, I have never used the word واش انت بربري. I would say واش انت شلح, واش انت من الأطلس, واش انت من الريف ولا من جهة فيقيق. وعمرني ما استعملت لو مو بربري. حتى في my repertoire, my everyday repertoire, this is why for me I wouldn't consider it as a Moroccan. Of course, with that from historical perspective and all the explanations, I'm very aware of all this as a linguist, and there are even people who are against the use of Berber. So for me, in Arabic, it doesn't have a negative connotation because I have never used it in my repertoire. ما عمرني قلت عندي واحد أنا بربرية وعندي جوج صحاباتي بربريين or this is why I would consider it. Probably it is loaded in English and probably in French with negative connotations, but for me as a Moroccan, I would never call someone who is an Amazigh بربري. I would say عندي صاحبتي شلحة, عندي صاحبتي من الأطلس, صاحبتي من الريف, ريفية, and so on. So when I used it, it didn't have any negative connotation.
If I can just... It's time we get over this appellation controversy. Is it Berber? Is it Amazigh? Is it Tamazight? Is it Imazighan? Is it... it's very confusing to a lot of people, especially non-Moroccans. And so that's the reason we use Berber. It's just for ease of communication with people who don't know anything about the natives of this part of the world. They only know Arabs. And so to counter the Arabs, we say, well, we have Berbers too. They are the original folks of this part of the world. And so, but once you start getting into Amazigh, Tamazight, Imazighan, it gets a little bit confusing. Personally, I have talked to several people, especially people who are no longer in IRCAM, who have had no problem with the word Berber. I don't know if it's a new thing. I think most people understand that it has, at least for us Moroccans, I think it doesn't have any negative connotations. People who are educated know the root of the word. So I think it's time we go beyond it. That's at least what I think.
So this is why for us as Moroccans, we do
Yeah.
not see the words
Okay.
in a negative way.
Can we take another question?
Aziz, I think had his hand.
Say Aziz. Okay.
private sectors are different. So what is it that, that accounts for this discrepancy between the two different schools, the public and the private sector? So it can't be technology, because I know I have had the chance to work in 3 different universities, and I can tell you for Is it a problem? Again, maybe that should probably justify why you probably have a negative attitude towards the private sector. Is that something that has to do with us as faculty?
No,
Or it's
no,
something
no, no,
else?
no, no, no. The same answer I gave our friend, sorry, I don't know your name.
Yusuf, that's Professor Yusuf Mehmet from NSU.
So Yusuf, same answer I gave. I think the teachers have all kinds of pressures on them to go out and seek ways to complement their income, and that's fair. But what I have a problem with is the whole system of equity and justice. How the private school, which is supposed to be a good school model, is not accessible to all. It's only accessible to those who can pay for it. That's my problem. And I just don't think it's fair. That's all. But I think it's fair that anybody has the right to go out and seek employment to increase their income. There's nothing wrong with that. When I started out in the United States, I had to work, I worked 2 jobs because I needed to pay rent. So the problem is the outcome of the privatization of the educational sector has resulted in creating a gap between those who have access and can pay for that access and those who don't. That's the only issue I have.
Thank you, Sir Mohammed. So, how many questions can we afford?
Restroom.
Just one?
I need to drive to Fez.
Oh, okay. So,
I'm sorry, I have to drive back to Fez.
so we'll stop here. So, Ayub, we can talk about this over coffee or something. There is, Yasin, there is a coffee break here. I think it's the teacher's staff room. It's right here. We'll just follow Yasin and Mohammed, okay? Don't go away. And then just to close it up, see Mohammed Errihani, author. Dr. Errihani, thank you so much for being with us today and for congratulations for the publication of your book. I would like to thank Dr. Minafka for having been with us. As I said earlier, this event could not have been possible without the dean's support, administrative support, student support, and of course your attendance, lovely audience. I'd like to thank you all for this. I'll see you there.